I found in the comments that Buber sought to evoke multiple voices as seminal to his later understanding of dialogue, a dialogue between multiple individuals, ultimately beholden to some ultimate reality. And that will lead us to the final conclusion of this session. Zeev Harvey will speak about Buber as an anti-Platonist. Zeev is a colleague from the Department of Jewish Thought at the Hebrew University, and like myself, emeritus. Please, Zeev.
Thank you very much, Paul.
You have a Paul.
My talk will simply continue Galit's talk. As Len wrote, edited the Kabbalah, Buber did exactly the same thing, retold the Hasidim, the stories of the Hasidim, of Hasidut. And not everybody liked the way Buber did it. And I'm going to speak about Gershom Scholem. But I wonder, maybe I don't know if Galit knows this answer, what did Gershom Scholem think about Lenroth's retelling of the Kabbalah? He probably didn't like it. It's worth looking into. It's worth looking into. It was Gershom Scholem who claimed that Martin Buber's interpretation of Hasidism is not objective, is tendentious. Why? Because it is influenced by his anti-Platonism. In my remarks this morning, I should like to say something about Buber's anti-Platonism. In October 1961, Gershom Scholem published a long article in Commentary magazine titled Martin Buber's Hasidism. A revised version was published in Buber's in Gershom Scholem's The Messianic Idea in Judaism in 1971. The original German text has been published at least twice. The article was outrageous, but brilliant. It was outrageous in its unfairness to Buber, but it was brilliant in the way it redefined old concepts. Gershom Scholem criticized Buber for writing that Hasidism taught and you can look now at what Buber actually wrote in text number 3. Text number 3 there. Buber, no, text number 3. Yeah, not number 2, 3. Yeah, that's what Buber, that's the text that upset Scholem. Gershom Scholem criticized Buber inter alia for writing that Hasidism taught a constant, undaunted, and exalted joy in the here and now. He explained his criticism as follows, quote, and now you can look at the text number 2, which is Scholem, text number 3, which is Scholem's text. He explained his criticism as follows: the undaunted and exalted or enthusiastic joy which Hasidism certainly did demand of its followers is not a joy in the here and now. Right? Buber said Hasidism had a joy in the here and now. Scholem said no, the Hasidim did not have a joy in the here and now. In joy, or let me say, says Gershom Scholem, in doing whatever one does with full concentration, a human being communes not with the here and now itself, as Buber would have it, but with...
I will take the computer off.
Okay.
Because...
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, I'm not using it. Okay, thank you. Enjoy, says Gershom Scholem, or let me say, in doing whatever one does with full concentration, anything that one does with full concentration, not only joy, a human being communes not with the here and now itself, as Buber would have it, but with what is hidden in the negligible garment of the here and now. Scholem says that the here and now is only a negligible garment, right? The negligible garment of the here and now. Moreover, Scholem continued, in connecting with the transcendent, quote, we destroy the here and now. We destroy it. We destroy the here and now, instead of, as Buber wishes, realizing in its full concreteness. So when those Hasidim are enjoying with enthusiasm their connection with the divine, it's not in the here and now, as Buber said, but it's in the transcendent world. The here and now is just a negligible garment. The Hasidim rip apart this garment and enter into the transcendent. Now, first it will be noted that Sholem has redefined the good old concept of the here and now, or hik and nuk, in both ordinary language today and in philosophic language since the Stoics and the Epicureans. The concept refers to spatio-temporal position. The here and now stands in contrast to elsewhere. It's not here, and it's not in the past, and it's not in the future, it's now. One who lives in the here and now neither wallows in the past nor postpones gratification until the future, the Messianic period perhaps, but tries to make the most of every present moment. Sholem redefines the concept. The here and now, as he redefines it, does not stand in opposition to the past and the future, but rather it stands in opposition to the transcendent. I don't know if anybody defined the here and now in this way before Sholem. This is really amazing. Here and now does not refer to living today and not in the past or in the future, but it means not living in the imminent world, but living in the imminent world, not enjoying the world of transcendence. The here and now refers to immanence in contrast to transcendence. Sholem has deftly transformed a concrete chronological concept into an abstract metaphysical one. Second, Sholem claims the joy of Hasidism destroys the here and now. This extreme view recalls the dictum of the Maimonidean philosopher Yeshayahu Leibovitz, who held that nothing but a handbreadth, a tefach, separates true faith, emunah, and absolute nihilism. Third, Sholem's extraordinary remarks about the communion with the transcendent and the destruction of the here and now are not restricted by him to followers of Hasidism, but apply to everyone, religious and non-religious, Jew or non-Jew, and they are not restricted to joy, but apply to whatever one does with full concentration. The here and now is nothing but a negligible garment, which needs to be destroyed whenever anyone does something with full concentration. This is a profound and I think unprecedented mystical sentiment that we find here in Gershom Sholem. Fourth, Sholem's remarks blatantly misrepresent Buber's use of the term here and now. We can look now in the first text, source number 1. For Buber wrote famously in I Am Thou, in part 3, what is it that is eternal, the primal phenomenon, present in the here and now? The Jetzt und Hier, which we term revelation, the Offenbarung, strong term of revelation in the here and now. So Buber is really speaking about getting the transcendent in the here and now. Everything that Sholem said that Buber did not do, Buber did. Buber is actually saying it. And that's we see it very strongly again and again in I Am Thou. And we see it in Buber's Tales of the Hasidim. We have known it, Buber states, but our knowledge does not reduce its mystery. This eternal revelation, present in the here and now, is described in Exodus 3:14 by God's words, I am there as whoever I am there. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. So Buber attributes to the here and now the strongest possible transcendence, God's revelation as I am who I am, or the God of existence, the God of being, who is the eternal revelation, the eternal thou. In his commentary article on Buber, therefore, Scholem presented his own remarkable new mystical theory, according to which all joy and all acts done with full concentration are intense experiences of the transcendent, which annihilate, destroy the here and now. He also profoundly misrepresented Buber's views on Hasidism. Elsewhere in the commentary article, Scholem accused Buber of tendentiousness. In his judgment, Buber was not interested in understanding Hasidism on its own terms, but Buber had an agenda. The essence, I quote, the essence of his interest in Hasidism, Scholem charged, was his desire to interpret it as an anti-Platonic existentialist teaching. That's what Buber wanted to do. He didn't want to tell us about Hasidism. He didn't want to tell us what the Hasidim were really thinking. He wanted to interpret Hasidism as an anti-Platonic existential teaching. Driven by his anti-Platonism and existentialism, Buber, according to Scholem, presented Hasidism as ignoring the transcendent and reveling in the imminent here and now. This is a fascinating accusation against Buber. To be sure, the charge that Buber's writings on Hasidism were motivated by his existentialism is not at all surprising and deserves little attention, since he was widely hailed and maligned as an existentialist, especially in the late 1950s and early 1960s. However, the charge that Buber's writings on Hasidism were motivated by his anti-Platonism is uncommon and requires attention. Was Buber really and truly an anti-Platonist? One must also ask oneself, what did Scholem himself think? Did he think that Hasidism was Platonic and non-existentialist? Apparently, yes, he did. Now, Scholem was clearly a Hegelian, explicitly a Hegelian, and arguably, in some sense, a Platonist or Neoplatonist. I sat in his class when he taught John Scotus Erigena, and I can testify he's a Neoplatonist. Now, Scholem was clearly Hegelian, arguably, in some sense, a Platonist or Neoplatonist. Buber's interpretation of Hasidism may indeed be understood as reflecting his anti-Platonism and anti-Hegelianism. Buber really was an anti-Platonist and anti-Hegelian, while Scholem's criticism of Buber may be said to reflect his Neoplatonism and Hegelianism, perhaps. Well, I am admittedly not an expert on Hasidism, but my half-educated guess is that Hasidism is much better seen as anti-Platonic and anti-Hegelian than as Platonic and Hegelian. Buber was fond of quoting the Kotzker Rebbe, who asked, "Where is the dwelling place of God?" and answered, "Wherever one lets him in." In other words, God is revealed in the here and now. In any case, Scholem's criticism of Buber was outrageous, but he may not have been wrong about the centrality of anti-Platonism in Buber's philosophy. Not only may he not have been wrong, but he may have put his finger on something very, very important. On April 25th, 1938, 1 month after his arrival in Palestine from Germany, Buber began his career at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem by delivering in Hebrew the annual inaugural lecture on Mount Scopus. It was an important lecture for Buber, and Paul has written about it in his new book on Buber. The annual inaugural lecture on Mount Scopus was considered a significant academic event in Jerusalem and drew a large and dignified and distinguished audience. This was the first time Buber had ever delivered a public lecture in Hebrew. It was also his first opportunity to introduce himself to his new colleagues and future students. He must have chosen his topic very carefully. Buber chose as his topic a comparison of Plato and Isaiah. I mean, if you're going to inaugurate you're going to be the first professor of sociology at the Hebrew University, what are you going to talk about except Plato and Isaiah? the social role of the prophet and the philosopher. Buber chose as his topic a comparison of Plato and Isaiah. In his lecture titled The Demand of the Spirit in Historical Reality, he criticized Plato and identified with Isaiah. It was, in other words, an anti-Platonic lecture. Among the faculty members in the audience was Gershom Scholem. We can look at source number 4, which gives us a text from that anti-Platonic lecture on Mount Scopus. According to Buber's analysis, Plato believed that the spirit was the possession of the individual, whereas Isaiah did not believe that. Isaiah believed that the spirit seizes the individual, sweeps him or her where it will, and then moves on. Similarly, Buber continued, Plato believed that political power is in the possession of the individual, whereas Isaiah did not, I suppose, like the current ministers who were quoted by Sam Brody. They think that political power is in the hands of the ministers. Buber didn't, but Plato thought so, but Isaiah didn't do so. So I suppose Smotrich is more Greek than Hebrew. Similarly, Buber continued, Plato believed that political power is a possession of the individual, whereas Isaiah did not believe it. Isaiah believed that political power is vouchsafed to the individual to enable him or her to discharge one's duties as God's lieutenant. If one abuses this power, it destroys him or her. Paul has suggested convincingly that Buber's anti-Platonism in this inaugural lecture is at least partly indebted to his anarchist friend, Gustav Landauer, who had been assassinated in 1919. Paul writes, I quote, in elaborating the nature of the prophetic calling, Buber also draws upon Gustav Landauer's anti-Platonic conception of political truth and action, whereby the prophet sets no universally valid image of perfection, no pantopia or utopia before men, but directs his action to a particular historical and social context. One thing is certain. Buber considered the anti-Platonic theme to be so important that he chose to speak on it in his inaugural lecture on Mount Scopus. He returned to this theme in his 1940 Hebrew essay, False Prophets, which concerned the confrontation between the prophets Jeremiah and Hananiah ben Azur in Jeremiah chapter 28. Jeremiah, Buber tells us, knew that one must listen again and again at every hour for God's changing word. God, Buber says, is a living God. He has truth, but he does not have a system. The eternal vow is neither a Platonist nor a Hegelian. Let me conclude. Gershom Scholem's criticism of Buber in his 1961 commentary article, Martin Buber's Hasidism, was certainly unfair to Buber. However, Scholem was right that Buber's works on Hasidism, like his works on the Bible, Zionism, socialism, and everything else, were influenced by his anti-Platonism. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Everyone may decide for himself or herself. Thank you.